Good Sunday evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Southern Oregon Weather Weekend Update. We'll start with a storm recap and see if the rain and snow totals that fell matched our forecast for the past few days. Then we'll talk about our forecast for the rest of the week. And it looks like we're going to be seeing a return to spring. However, will spring settle in for good? That's what we'll talk about in our long-range outlook. But first, let's take a look at current conditions. Here we can see we have some thunderstorms developing over western Jackson County and then up north toward the Douglas County, Coos County line. Some of these thunderstorms could produce gusty winds, maybe small hail, thunder of course, and maybe some lightning strikes. So we'll have to see what the reports are tomorrow as far as thunder and lightning went for these areas. The HRRR model suggests that some of those showers could continue for the next couple hours, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Here are snowfall totals. This was the model that I showed you from the previous video, the WRF, and you can see over the past few days it had been predicting between 8 to 12 inches of snow for the Cascades and maybe up to 8, maybe 10 inches for areas of the Siskiyous. If you recall my forecast from the previous video, I suggested that this was maybe a touch overdone and that amounts of 8 to 10 inches would be more common in the Cascades with up to 6 inches in the Siskiyous. And it looks like that forecast largely verified. Here's the data from Annie Springs at the top. You can see over the past day there's been a foot increase in snow depth with about 1.3 inches of liquid precipitation, so about a 10 to 1 snow to water ratio. And here as well we have Big Red Mountain showing 0.4 inches of liquid precipitation that fell over the past day with 4 inches of snowfall, so also a 10 to 1 snow to water ratio. I was up skiing on Mount Ashland, actually the backside of Mount Ashland, areas that are still open, not developed areas, and it felt in some places more like 6 inches. Of course, some of that was wind transported. So overall, I think our forecast did pretty well. So what can we expect for the rest of the week? Well, the Weather Channel is calling for a gradual warming trend through the week, and that, is strongly evident in the models as this upper level ridge here builds over the Pacific Northwest, with troughing to the south, moving into the desert southwest. That's our departing system that's just moving through today and this evening. But we'll really be enjoying some spring-like temperatures over the next week, so enjoy that. As far as the rest of the month goes, though, can we expect those warm conditions to stick around? Well, here's the European model's forecast for the MJO. And the MJO over the next several days is forecasted to go into phases 8, 1, and 2. Phases 8 and 1 are warm phases for Southern Oregon, and so that lines up well with the spring-like weather we'll be seeing over the next week. However, you can see toward the end of the forecast period here, the European model starts taking the MJO into cooler phases, phases 2 and 3. The PNA does something interesting as well. It starts out negative, which corresponds to the storminess we're seeing now. Then it trends positive over the next week. That will correspond with our warming and drying trend. But then look, it dips back negative toward mid-month. And in combination with these cooler MJO phases that the European model is taking us toward, phases 2 and 3, that could mean that after our week of spring, we see some potentially cooler and wetter conditions mid-month. This is what all of the 3 major ensembles are showing for day 10. So Wednesday, April 15th. You can see the American model on the upper left has this ridge pretty close to the west coast and most of the troughing into the east. The Canadian ensemble here on the upper right tries to dig this troughing back toward the west coast and shifts the ridging up toward the Gulf of Alaska a little bit further, and the European model is somewhere in between. Which one of those is right? Well, if we take a look at the trends that these models are continuing through the end of the month, we have the GEPS, once again favoring more troughing over southwest Oregon and northern California. And we have the GEFS continuing its trend of building a ridge closer to the west coast. I think the reality will be somewhat closer to the European model, showing kind of a blend of these two solutions with some form of ridging off the west coast, but probably not as far as the GEFS ensemble is suggesting. There will probably be some form of troughing over the central part of the United States into the Rockies. If you recall, we discussed that in the last video, but I don't think the troughing will be as strong here over our area as the Canadian ensemble is suggesting. I think we do go back to some slightly cooler and wetter conditions mid-month, but probably not as stormy of a period as we just saw over the past week. Because we also have to remember our AAM, our atmospheric angular momentum, which is forecast to remain positive and even go more positive toward the end of the month. And the correlations with that, with a positive AAM, favor ridging somewhere off the west coast and troughing somewhere in the central part of the United States around the Rockies. Now that looks pretty similar to a blend of these two solutions, with the ridging somewhere off the west coast, maybe this trough pulled a little bit farther back into the Rockies. See the similarity there? So I think that's the type of pattern that we could be seeing for a good part of the month once we have our week of spring this week. So, in summary, our snow forecast was largely on track. Up on the backside of Mount Ashland in the wilderness area, felt pretty deep for the beginning of April, so that will certainly help to increase our snowpack, and our water outlook is looking a little bit more favorable now for the summer than maybe it did a couple weeks ago before these recent snowfalls. However, we will see spring return for this coming week. Looks like conditions will be warmer and drier until the weekend, and possibly after. However, that falling PNA, Pacific North American pattern, and the cooler MJO phases 2 and 3 suggests that possibly toward the middle of the month we could see some cooler and wetter times. That strong atmospheric angular momentum, though, suggests that I think most of the cooler air will be focused over the Rockies. That doesn't mean that we couldn't end up with cooler than normal conditions. It just means that the core of the cooler air won't be focused over Oregon. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this upcoming week of nice weather. Don't forget to set your notifications for the midweek update in a few days. Stay safe, stay healthy, and please leave a comment if you enjoyed the forecast for today.